Senator Marco Rubio, thank you for coming to Israel, and thank you for joining us on I-24 News.
I'm happy to be here in person in your studios, and I appreciate the chance to do this.
Well, thank you for coming. Now, you're speaking to us after meeting with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. So first of all, what was your message to him, and what was his message to you?
Well, I think his message to me is the one you've seen publicly, which is this commitment to finish the operation in Gaza, in particular with regards to Rafah. And one of the things that drove me to visit here is I don't think enough attention is being paid in the United States to what's happening in the north of Israel, where tens of thousands of Israelis have been displaced from their homes, where kids have had to leave school because of a situation there with Hezbollah, which has, of course, increased since what happened on October 7th. And so even as the situation in Gaza continues to unfold and the Israelis are going to do what they need to do in order to make sure that Hamas is no longer a threat, we have this looming situation in the north of Israel with Hezbollah that's going to have to be addressed as well.
Well, let me ask you, you're vice chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. You have access to the privy to the most sensitive intelligence information about Iran and its proxies like Hezbollah. There's been mixed signals from the administration about whether Israel would have the green light to deal with Hezbollah, and maybe eventually Iran itself. I want to get your feelings on that.
Well, I can't speak for the administration. Hezbollah is multiple times more capable militarily than Hamas. It has not just an arsenal of rockets, but of guided munitions. They can produce it domestically. And basically every single day there are alerts and launches against the north of Israel. So Hezbollah is a pre-existing threat that I think has now only grown. What happened on October 7th with Gaza can never happen again, much less in the north. And it's a situation Israel's going to have to confront. And I know that they know this. Now, ideally, the situation would be that there'd be some agreement of some sort that creates a demilitarized or buffer zone within the south of Lebanon. That's the ideal outcome, obviously. But I think there needs to be greater awareness in the United States about how serious the situation is.
Well, what should be the U.S. role? Because the U.S. has been in active combat with other Iranian proxies in Iraq, for example, in Syria, the Houthis in the Red Sea.
Well, I think part of this is Hezbollah's willingness to agree to some return of some sort of demilitarized zone where they wouldn't have ground troops there and the ability to immediately invade the north of Israel will be in very many ways driven by what their perceptions are of international support. I mean, for Israel. And if they believe that Israel's exhausted all of its international goodwill, and in particular support from the United States because of Gaza, they may very well feel like there's no pressure on them and that they have all the leverage to continue doing what they're doing and to make no adjustments in Lebanon. So I think that's why it's important. I would tell you that in the United States, the number of Americans who are aware of the number of people from northern Israel who have been permanently displaced or have been displaced is nil. Most people are not even aware that this is a reality. And I say, you know, if 60 or 70 or 80 or 90,000 people in Texas were permanently displaced from Texas because some cartel in Mexico was launching rockets at us, what would be the reaction in the United States? And I think in this particular case, on a per capita basis, you know, we're talking about millions of Americans were permanently displaced. That's what it would represent. So I think there needs to be greater awareness so that Hezbollah is clear that the U.S. and all of Israel's allies are supportive, not simply of the elimination of Hamas, but also dealing with the situation in the north.
And what about with Iran itself? You actually commented on the recent Iranian airstrike and what options are for Israel's response.
So I think one of the biggest lies or misunderstandings in the debate about all of this is that somehow the central issue in the region is the Israeli-Palestinian issue. It is not. The central issue in this region is Iran's ambition to be a regional hegemonic power. They basically now have control of the Iraqi government. We've seen the influence and control they have over Syria. They have Hezbollah is a full-blown agent of Iran right on Israel's border. I think that puts Jordan in threat at some point, and obviously we've seen the role the Houthis have played. So suddenly you see this noose that builds up that they try to put around Israel, at which point what you're seeing in northern Israel, you would see throughout the country, making Israel at that point an unlivable place, and it would collapse the state and achieve Iran's ambition for the region. That's really the central threat in this region. Now imagine an Iran with a nuclear capability. Now they become Kim Jong-un. Now they become North Korea with some level of immunity of action because of that nuclear threat that they would possess. So I think it is really important for people to wrap their head around the fact that the central irritant of destabilization, violence, and suffering in this region is not the Israeli-Palestinian issue.
Is that the view in Washington, D.C.?
Well, that's certainly my view and the view of a lot of people that understand this. I'm not sure. I can't speak for the administration and others who probably don't view it the same way or to the same extent. But it's the absolute truth. If Iran did not exist, let me not say Iran, if the Iranian regime were not in power and did not exist, there would be no Hezbollah. There probably would be no Hamas, certainly not with these capabilities. There most certainly would be no Houthi threat. Syria would look very different. Iraq would look very different. Imagine a region without the Iranian regime.
Well, that would be more the mission of the United States than certainly that's not something Israel.
Yeah, no, and I think that one of the problems in the broader West is being naive about your enemies or being naive about your threats. And I think part of the missed opportunity here within Iran is the fact that the Iranian regime is just very unpopular. There are few countries in the world where the population and the leaders are more different than in the case of Iran. We saw just yesterday they sentenced a dissident hip-hop artist or rapper to death. We saw just a couple days ago that they've ramped up efforts. They are literally beating up women in the streets.
So should regime change be a goal, a strategic goal of the United States or the West?
I think it should be, and I think it should be it's certainly a goal of the Iranian people, and we should be supportive of that. We don't spend enough time talking about the fact that the overwhelming majority, especially of young Iranians, do not like this regime, do not like living under this regime, and want to live in a different world and in a different country. And we most certainly, at a minimum, should be echoing those voices and supporting them, not simply accepting this notion that somehow the Iranian regime is representative of the Iranian people. It is not.
Right. I want to go back to Rafah for a minute, because you said you expressed your support for an Israeli operation into Rafah, potentially that could, for example, free hostages and eliminate Hamas. There's been mixed signals. Again, you don't speak for the White House. You have your difference with them on that. And then, of course, on the question of the day after, what comes? Because there's been clear differences between the Biden administration and the Netanyahu government. And actually, this is an issue that could end up being decided by a future Republican administration. Yeah. What happens with the Palestinians?
Well, look, on the first point, I'm not a military tactician, but I know what the goal is, and the goal is that Hamas never have the capability to ever do again what it did on the 7th of October. And to do that, you can't allow, I understand, without being a military tactician, that you cannot allow the last remnant of their organization to emerge from this conflict, because they'll claim it as a victory. And it will not just simply empower Hamas, it'll also empower all of Israel's enemies. Israel is a country whose national defense is almost entirely based on deterrence, deterring their enemies. And this is the opposite of deterrence. If Hamas, as currently structured, survives this conflict, it will be the opposite of deterrence. It will encourage other groups to be more adventurous in their attacks on Israel. Now, from a tactical perspective, the Israelis believe that that is going in and taking them out in their last stronghold. Now, I don't speak for the Israeli government, obviously, either. Right. I'm not a military tactician. But if that's what they've deduced is necessary for victory, then I think we need to be supportive of it. We're either supportive of victory or we're not. And I would say that when it comes to rules of engagement, one of the important things I point to my colleagues is Israel's engagement in Gaza has put more restrictions in an effort to protect innocent life than the U.S. put on our own troops in Afghanistan or in Iraq. War is a terrible thing, because in war, innocent people die. In this particular case, many innocent people have died because Hamas has deliberately placed them in the way and protected themselves with these human shields. And when you're dealing with an enemy that doesn't value human life, we set a terrible precedent when we tell them that they can get away with it. And I think Israel continues to take extraordinary steps to avoid innocent civilian losses in that region, and been very patient with this effort. But eventually they're going to have to go in and do what they need to do to finish this job.
All right.